Get a load of this, people, because a year ago, former ONS statistician Jamie Jenkins scrutinised the decision for COVID advisors to be prematurely given their honours. Dr Jenny Harries, the head of the UK Health Security Agency and responsible for track and trace, received a damehood, while Professor Chris Whitty was knighted. Yeah. They were honoured for the lives they saved due to lockdowns. But what about all the lives that they put at risk because of the lockdowns? What about the people who are now dying because of lockdowns? As of now, there are reportedly 800 more people dying each week than normal levels. Sir Chris Whitty himself has just warned that thousands of middle-aged people are now dying of heart conditions after many were reluctant to bother the scared NHS during the pandemic. Whose fault was that, Chris? Whose fault was that? This year has seen a higher number of deaths than normal from preventable conditions. So, was the cure worse than the disease? Here to break it down is the man himself, former ONS statistician. He's the stat man, he's the main man. It's Jamie Jenkins. Jamie, great to see you. Happy New Year and all that jazz. Let's get stuck straight into this. Why on earth were this lot given titles, given honours? It's a scandal, isn't it?
Well, I think so, Patrick, and it kind of makes a mockery of the whole honour system. You've had it again this year. You've got Alok Sharma being given Sir Alok Sharma. He's been kind of blowing up kind of power stations the last couple of years, and he's been given a knighthood this year when you look at his contribution to combating climate change. But yeah, if we go back to last year, I was calling this out because, you know, we just gone through part of the, you know, the big part of the pandemic, and then some people would say, well, they're just doing their job. But to give out these big honours last year, and I think it's a scandal because we haven't had the COVID inquiry complete yet. It started in 2022, but it's going to take several years, obviously, to come out with things. But when you actually look at all of the facts and figures, Patrick, remember now, people have short memories, but I'm sure most people watching tonight, Patrick, will remember the podiums, which was stay home, protect the NHS, save lives. And some people say, well, what Chris Whitty was saying is stay home to stop infecting other people, not stay home and avoid the NHS. Well, that is not what the figures show, Patrick, because if you look at the data, the number of people turning up to A&E fell off a cliff. The number of patients in total in hospital during the height of the pandemic, actually, if you look at all causes, was lower, one of the lowest of the last 6 years. So people stayed away and people are dying from it.
Chris Whitty is like an absolute trigger for me, and he was at the time. When I heard next slide, please, I nearly walked into the sea one evening. I just thought, I've had enough of this, right? And to see him getting honoured, OK, I am willing to accept that his heart was in the right place, but I just do not think he understood the utter fear that he pumped into the hearts of this country with, a lot of the time, very, very, very dubious data. And it was presented as fact. I don't care what anyone says, it was presented as though this was cast iron. And it terrified people. And now look at where we are, Jamie. We've got 7 million people on the rest on an NHS waiting list. We've got excess deaths coming out of our ears. More people dying every single week than died at the height of the Afghan war, for goodness sake. We've got people now who are struggling with mental health problems, people who've got addictions because they were locked inside, elderly people, and of course people who didn't bother going to see a GP because they were worried about, well, they couldn't see a GP, but people who were worried about bothering the NHS. Our economy is in the toilet. And Jamie, I mean, for goodness sake, give this man a knighthood, no?
And that is what the scandal is, Patrick, because, you know, you give a knighthood for people is recognition for perhaps doing a great job. We know not everybody who gets a knighthood has done a great job, but, you know, why not wait until after a COVID inquiry? What if there's any criticism that comes out from this? It's going to look, you know, a bit silly in terms of that. And you're right, you look at this time last year, Patrick, we were told if we don't have more restrictions going into not the Christmas just gone, the Christmas before, that, you know, deaths are going to go up, the Omicron variants hit us. And what Boris Johnson and the cabinet, in partly because, Patrick, the backbenchers were kind of on his back saying, look, we can't stomach any more restrictions. Boris went against them. And then what we could do, mark the homework of SAGE, which Chris Whitty would obviously been promoting at the cabinet meetings in terms of this. And the numbers, Patrick, were 93% lower than what the models were saying last Christmas. So what would they have been like if we were marking the homework of all the lockdowns previously? But yeah, I think it's, you know, it was a scandal this time last year. It does kind of irk me as well when you see this year and him coming out now saying that people are dying because they stayed home and avoided the NHS. Well, that's exactly what they were saying to do. And people are dying because of it. And I've seen some of the stuff on your TV station today, Patrick, clips of people and, families devastated because of this.
I did an interview that nearly brought me to tears earlier on today, just after 3 p.m, with a lovely lady called Lisa, who incredibly bravely, very tearfully, emotionally, told me about her husband's passing. He was trying to see a GP for however long, couldn't get a face-to-face appointment, was one of the many people misdiagnosed over FaceTime or Zoom on a virtual appointment. He's dead. And I'm looking at these figures now, 800 people a week dying, excess deaths. And it's not just the dead people, it's their families. And you magnify that out, or it's the people who worked for them, or their colleagues, the impact on the economy as well. I mean, instead of a knighthood, should Chris Whitty be made to apologise?
Well, I think all the politicians around at the time should be made to apologise, because ultimately, obviously, he would argue he was giving advice, and it's the politicians that where things kind of the buck stops. I would imagine there, Patrick. But right, you're right. Those heartbreaking stories, they are kind of devastating, and you hit the nail on the head with the waiting list. There's 7.2 million, but what we're seeing is, some of these waiting lists are not just people who've been on the waiting list for, say, 10, 12 weeks. The number of people waiting over a year has rocketed up as well. Waiting for heart procedures has rocketed up. And to come out and say, people avoiding the NHS and people are dying because of it, that is something that a lot of people were saying back in March 2020, that this was going to happen. And it's, I think, the point you raised there, Patrick, which I think is important to kind of pull out there, is the fear that was put in there. Because remember, we had different waves of COVID, but people stayed away from the NHS, even when there was very little COVID going around in some of the summer months, because they still felt, I better protect the NHS and to save lives. And people have stayed away far too long. And we've got people who would have died, Patrick, not just because they were misdiagnosed, but because they didn't even get diagnosed in the first place.
GPs were not given the hurry up to get back into their surgeries. They were not given the hurry up at all. We had people double, triple vaccinated, etc. We had waves of coronavirus, all right, we had Omicron and stuff, but GPs needed to be back in their surgeries, and it was all too easy for them to continue down this ridiculous virtual appointment rabbit hole. And the amount of lives that will be lost there. Chris Whitty was all very well and good telling us that you needed to shut down your business, that you couldn't go out to the gym, that you couldn't do various things. You had to bankrupt yourself and sacrifice yourself at the altar of our beloved NHS, but he was no good when it came to getting that NHS back moving again. Jamie, thank you very, very much.